and everything. And we've been trying to reach and to ask to someone from Facebook if they could come. That's the only question asked. I have to be cautious because I know some people in this company. I don't want to say I'm using my relationship to, you know, whatever, but I was asking if Facebook wanted to at least have someone, and they said it was too early, so I totally understand. I'm sorry about that, but we probably will make an update in 2021 if by chance it's happening. I want to make an introduction. I'm very structured, so we're going to start with the letter A. And Jeremy, if you don't mind to introduce yourself. I know already that you said that it was good, because I saw that in the Motley Fool with an interview, so don't tell me that now you changed your mind, or maybe you did. And if you can, first of all, are you on Facebook?
We're already taking things out of context. It's been like 5 minutes in, and it's 30 seconds.
Welcome to my world.
All right, perfect. Let's do it.
Are you on Facebook, first of all?
No.
All right. And then if you want to introduce yourself and explain why you're interested by this Libra.
Yeah, please. Yeah, happy to. So welcome everybody. My name is Jeremy Almond. I'm the CEO of a company called PayStand. PayStand is about a 4-year-old organization. It's a B2B payment network. So you can imagine what Venmo does between consumers making payments digital. We do for complicated commercial transactions with large enterprise. The company is fairly well scaled at this point. We recently introduced a large blockchain infrastructure project for other organizations to use the blockchain that we've been doing. We've been doing it at scale for quite a few years now. The company's venture backed, and the company's growing about 300% year over year, so we're doing okay. So excited to be here and kind of talk about how other organizations are scaling blockchain and beyond just sort of infrastructure level projects.
Thank you. So Shouhei, you're on Facebook?
Yes.
Okay. It's fine.
Proud user since very early days.
Yeah, and so Sam, are you good or bad feeling about the Libra?
So
just short. So okay. Good or bad?
Good. Bad.
Bad. All right. So please introduce yourself.
So my name is Shouhei Ichimiya. I'm with a firm called Global Brain. We're one of the largest venture capital firms from Japan. We have offices in Tokyo, Singapore, Seoul, and London, and San Francisco. I'm based in their San Francisco office. I've been with the firm for 2 years. I moved here 4 months ago, and I cover a lot of FinTech, blockchain-related kind of investments. And yeah, and since I cover the area, I'm really interested in what Libra is doing. Looking at the sector the last 2 years, it's been driven by a lot of speculation, giving this negative image that technology is not legitimate. But I think this new Libra thing gives it this legitimization in a sense, given one of the largest tech companies is creating this initiative. So really interested in what Libra is doing and to discuss that today.
Nice.
Yeah.
Miko, so are you on Facebook?
Yes, I am.
Good. And so good or bad?
It's great.
I love that. So please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. I'm Miko. I'm a general partner with Gumi Cryptos, which is a venture capital fund focused on crypto and blockchain investment, and a co-founder of an exchange called Evercoin. So I'm excited to be here, and I guess to give me just a quick lens, I've been in Silicon Valley 25-ish years, mostly working on open source software. So to me, the emergence of open source financial infrastructure is really interesting, and I think we're in an incredibly unprecedentedly historical time, and I'm not purely optimistic about the time we're in because it's chaotic, and it's really the infrastructure that we've grown to rely on has effectively sort of failed us. And the new infrastructure is not available and ready to build on top of. So it's an extremely janky time to be alive, but it's also very interesting. So.
I like that. Raul, so Facebook?
I am on Facebook.
All right. And good or bad about Libra?
I'm going to say it's interesting.
Okay, you're French a little bit? A little bit of yes, a
no,
bit of no? No, I'm just kidding, it's okay.
Nothing against the French.
So many people, where are you from? So used to that question. And please introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm a co-founder of TRM Labs. We help trace crypto fraud across almost 1,500 cryptocurrencies. And so we basically help financial institutions manage risk for crypto and crypto-related assets. We just launched a Y Combinator this batch, and are super excited to work with the crypto ecosystem.
Congratulations, and you were authorized to leave YC for a while and do this panel. Very intense, right?
Well, we just had demo day yesterday, so now we're just sort of taking a deep breath and then getting back on the horse and sprinting again.
That's good, because
yeah, exactly.
It's very hard. So, and before to start with the questions, the audience, if you want to raise your hand, if you want to say who's on Facebook. All right? 50-50. And is there any investor in the crypto in the room? Someone investing in crypto? Good. I saw you. Okay, so I think it's interesting because I think it's quite simple to check what Libra is about. There's the blog post of David Marcus. There's the kind of booklet they made. So I think it would be interesting. I don't know how we can split. But just what is Libra in a few, or your vision of, maybe you have a different vision of Libra, so we can start with whoever wants. And,
so I just want to use the immortal words of David Marcus in his congressional testimony, which is Libra is a payment tool. That was his clever spin. So it's a payment tool.
Raoul, what is Libra? How can you think about the audience? Don't know what Libra is about.
Yeah, so Libra is trying to basically be, for lack of a better word, a payment tool. That's, I think what's fundamentally different about it is the first payment tool that's truly cross-border and cross-national, which is not denominated by or controlled by any one single government or jurisdiction. And I think that's what's truly different, number one. I think number two is the first payment tool that's inherently built from the internet. It's built for sort of the mobile web and the way people interact and do commerce today. And so those two things are sort of the key differentiators and what sort of makes Libra something special.
Okay. And Jeremy.
Yeah, I guess I'm just processing through the first digital payment tool, but what I'd say is most people in this audience are familiar with Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies and stuff. Congressional worming. Otherwise, I think most people would think of what Facebook Libra is doing is it's an application of their own blockchain and their own kind of cryptocurrency that's designed for payments and cross-border and potentially identity. And so we have Bitcoin, we have Ethereum, we have other cryptocurrencies. And so Facebook's taking an approach that is pegging their coin against a basket of assets. So it's not supposed to wildly move, it's supposed to be relatively pegged against things like the dollar and the euro and other assets, but it is its own sort of flavor of crypto to solve its own flavor of digital payment problems that they see. Good or bad, we'll see, but yeah.
Flavor is very romantic. I love that.
It's for you, my French friend.
Thank you. Shouhei.
So what they all said, essentially.
Well, it's your opinion.
It's transnational. It's digitally native. What's I think unique is that when a country issues a currency, they have the government to essentially dictate that that's the means of exchange. What's interesting about Libra is that they have a lot of corporations, Facebook, that they're cross-border, and they have this distribution that spans globally. So they essentially have this huge user-based distribution channel to start essentially a new kind of currency. So it's like it's digitally native. So there's no paper. So it's digital. It's transnational. So you can have one Libra in the U.S. and you can have one in the EU. It's the same. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Miko, I had a feeling you wanted to add something. No.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would respond in some ways by saying that the thing that to me is very exciting about what is happening with Libra is in some ways it's similarly exciting to a China coin or a Fed coin, all of which are projects that are surfacing. Because the way I look at it is that those are all responding, right? And they're essentially like traditional and nouveau financial infrastructure providers responding to, dare I say, Bitcoin, right? So I think that's a very interesting thing to understand, right? Which is, these are all responses at some level.
Even McDonald's, you were telling me just.
That's right. McDonald's has the Big Mac coin, which of course is more like fashion because it's not a blockchain and it's not digital. But I guess what I mean by it is that if you look at the zeitgeist, like it's now fashionable to create your own monetary policies and your own central banks and your own, so it's really a role of your own, and it's essentially this fundamental deconstruction of the, foundational fabric of society in the context of financial exchange.
And we don't get any money from McDonald's, to be sure. I just wanted to say it's because of you. You told me the story. I mean, it's a hard question, but no one had the time to see the Libra testnet a little bit, to see what's available. Anyone?
Yeah. So I think maybe to talk a little bit about how is it different than other digital currencies, as well as how is it different from some core infrastructure, is at least the concept of it is it's got a set of folks that are in a consortium. So this notion that there are major enterprises like a Visa of the world and other folks that are involved in the project. And so it's not entirely decentralized, but it's got a set of companies that are, the intention is to create checks and balances. Now there's an argument of whether or not they actually truly do that. The reason why I bring that up when we talk about the testnet is the testnet is pretty early when you actually use Libra and try to mess with Libra right now. And one of the things that's obvious about it is its first current incarnation is it's a centralized permissioned incarnation. So they've got some conceptual notions about blockchain being decentralized, which is a very, very important open concept of blockchain. But the state it's at right now is it's still a very early state where it's still a centralized permissioned method. And so I think there's an open question in the community on will blockchain from Facebook's perspective become more decentralized, or will it stay in a relatively permissioned centralized notion? Do you believe their marketing? Do you not? I think it's a very important open question.
I'm jumping into, we could have some questions before, but I just wanted to jump on that. Because when you do some investigations about Libra, you learn about new things, new words, the hot stuff. Move, so since you were, do they have to create their own language and this type of things to ensure that it's really like, what about those things? So the hot stuff is a sort of it's not easy for, I did accounting, I was not ready for that. But no, just hot stuff, move, why they had to, why they wouldn't use things, that are open source, or what's the reason, you think?
You want to I'm happy to.
Yeah, I can take that a little bit around. I'll speak specifically to the language. So again, we have to remember that unlike Bitcoin, unlike Ethereum, Move is built for a payment tool, very specifically for a payment tool. Bitcoin was built as sort of a scarce digital asset on top of, with some programming on top of that. Ethereum was built as truly a decentralized computer. You can run any, like Turing complete for those computer programmers here. Libra is just built to move $1 from A to B with some special logic in the middle. And so what Move allows you to do is to do that very safely. So we know on Ethereum, people have tried to write the same smart contract 15 times with 10 different types of bugs every time. And what Libra is trying to do with Move is to make it super, super hard for people to make mistakes that are going to cost people a lot of money. And I think it makes a lot of sense. Because that's the tool they're trying to build, which is we're just trying to build a blockchain that can keep track of dollars and cents and move them from A to B. And in that context, having a language that prevents the most obvious and most sort of damning mistakes is actually a good thing.
Interesting. Jeremy? No?
Well, I would say clearly the payments application is one of the most important things Libra is doing. But if you actually look at the white paper, there's some other implications of where does it go. One of them is identity. So we know blockchains actually do a lot more than payments and financial infrastructure. They're already laying the groundwork for more than payments. And so I think looking at Libra as just a payment infrastructure maybe is the first application, but I think they clearly have more ambitions than that. I mean, you can't look at Facebook and look at the M&A they've done with every major social network, right? They buy WhatsApp, they buy Instagram, they buy all these other things, they buy VR. They are clearly looking at what's ahead in the future and around the corner years out. And so I think one of the powers of the blockchain is it has infrastructure to be Web 3.0. And certainly Facebook is looking at it more than just for currency, is my perspective.
Yeah, when I introduced the phrase payment tool in the immortal words of David Marcus, like my tongue is pretty firmly planted in my cheek, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
in a way, like that's kind of the ultimate Trojan horse, right? Like in a sense, like he's really taking this. Oh, it's really just a payment tool, right? But clearly, like they are probably the most ambitious company in the world. You could argue, or at least maybe one that has the biggest shot at taking over everything. So. And plans to. So I certainly agree with that.
More than Amazon?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it's a good question. Amazon's big too. Can't
So,
wait for their coin.
all right. So I just want sometimes to switch to some funky questions because otherwise, it's going to be hard for me. So is it true that Mark Zuckerberg created Libra because the Wickenshaw twins created Gemini?
Yeah, the thing that Mark couldn't handle is the idea that the Winklevi were going to be richer than him. So I'm joking. I don't have any special insight on that. But I like the concept.
Because actually, I was. Someone has an opinion? No. Okay. No, really? Sure. No, because actually.
You should ask your contacts at Facebook.
Yeah, why not? I'm careful with that. So because maybe you heard that, but the brothers, they may work with Mark Zuckerberg, crypto, to join the Libra Association. So I found the rumor was quite interesting, and just wanted to highlight that. So another question I have in mind is, when is it available, this thing? What do you think?
So it really, to me, the biggest dependency in their critical path is really related again back to the congressional testimony, right? Which is that the Financial Services Committee was able to extract a pledge, and the pledge was that they were going to get all the necessary regulatory approvals, right, before releasing essentially anything. So if you actually look at that timeline, if they're going to honor that pledge, it may take time, right? Because the reality is that move fast and break things has long been the philosophy, and Facebook has released a lot of things pretty quickly, and they're good at shipping software. So I don't think that's the issue. I think the time frame is more uncertain as a function of regulation. That's my take.
Gentlemen?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it'll be interesting to see how they think about international launching outside of the most regulated jurisdictions. That's an interesting sort of potential way around some of these things, but I completely agree that the regulation side's going to be the bottleneck.
Okay, Jeremy, Shouhei, any bet on the date of release of?
So, no idea when to be exact, but I work in venture capital, and a lot of times the way we look at investments is what risks there are, and a lot of times we look at so is there market timing risk? And I think timing-wise, we're approaching one of the biggest supposedly macroeconomic changes. We're going to hit a recession, and if the traditional means of exchange are less reliable, maybe. But execution-wise, I mean, Facebook, they're very good at making products, so that's probably not the biggest risk when you look at. But I think platform risk, they're like, they're building the platform themselves, so they're, they can control their destiny in that respect. But I mean, again, it's the biggest risk for them to execute is governmental regulatory risk, given that's something they cannot control, and that's present in not just the U.S. They have to convince the U.S. They have to convince the EU. There's so many people they have to talk to, so I think it's all contingent really on that part of the equation, government regulatory risk.
I think all of that's true. As somebody who runs a company that's highly regulated in the payment space, I can say that you can't move fast and break stuff, because if you're moving $1 billion, like a break in code is very significant relative to a break in code in the social network where you don't see your dog's photos or whatever. So at some level, the notion that they can just release in the wild is harder for them. On the other hand, they've already got open code out in space. They've worked on a white paper for a year, and the culture of the company is one that tends to be, yes, we will get dragged in front of Congress. We will sort of nod our head and do what we need to do, and then we're going to continue to just move fast and break stuff. So I think this notion that the regulatory council is going to stop a company that's got a specific view of the world, they're going to probably play a balancing act, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's faster than people think it is. Now, that's not on a scale of weeks or months, but I also don't think the banking industry that I operate in every day, and I spend time at the top banks in the world, they work on timescales of years. Okay, the financial infrastructure that exists in the U.S. has not changed since the 70s. It's decades and decades old. Facebook is not going to operate at that speed, and that's the exciting thing about the space. I would say why I'm excited about what Facebook's doing is not because I believe in their vision of blockchain, but I believe in the notion of competitive environment in the financial service space. We need better financial software. And so I kind of think of it as the AOL moment. I don't love AOL, right? It was a closed garden system that was kind of around in the 90s, for those of you who are old enough to remember. They shipped CDs. It was not the open internet. But it was important in taking the internet from a series that was mostly about universities and academic use, and it drove the internet to be the open internet we are today. And so I think things like Facebook and other companies are driving the competition to blockchain being a commercial conversation and not simply a conversation about which blockchain infrastructure are you using, which quite frankly has been a lot of the blockchain conversation for the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years I've been involved. So.
All right, so I made a little research, and apparently they were just testing the water, and it seems that we're just probably 2020 won't see Libra starting. And I just want to say one thing: I'm an American citizen, and I would love to see the Libra. It's metaphoric. To see the Libra open during presidency with Donald Trump would be so funny. I think we would have a lot of fun. But sorry, it's just still a bit French inside there. Facebook Libra was watched closely by authorities in many countries. So we have the central banks, we have the data regulators. Can you give, if you have some insights about the situation right now, where it's hot, where it's cold? South Korea, Germany, UK.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the following. So if you look at Europe, it's definitely heterogeneous, and you have kind of crypto-friendly domiciles. Obviously, Switzerland being this kind of source of the Libra Foundation is definitely a fairly friendly jurisdiction. Obviously, Malta with the BFA Act, and virtual financial assets, which is sort of a subset of this kind of coin realm. So I think from the perspective of European domiciles, there's a lot of heterogeneity, and I think the same could be said in Asia as well, right? Obviously Japan is friendly but tightly regulated. Singapore is friendly and slightly less tightly regulated, and so I think it's the thing. I think the notable watchword is that the mileage can vary so dramatically, right? And in a way, like if you look at what Balaji Srinivasan commented, is he said essentially that Bitcoin is it's sort of a Thomas Schelling game of essentially cooperation without communication for people who are disenfranchised from the existing financial infrastructure, right? So in a way, what you're really seeing is this kind of crazy poker game. But the fascinating thing about the poker game is that pretty much people know what the other players are going to play. So that's what makes this thing have such a strong network effect. And when I say this thing, I'm talking about open source financial infrastructure, of which Libra is an example.
What do we say in Japan? I think you talk to some people in Japan from time to time.
So right now, like when you talk about Libra, nobody really knows about it in Japan, to be completely honest. So we work with a lot of companies, large corporations from Japan, and talk about it. Like, why can't you guys considered being a node and meet to run Libra? And a lot of them, what's Libra? Is the reaction. But there have been can't say who, but discussions with major Japanese corporations about they've always had points, like rewards points, and they've been always thinking about how they can expand on that and try to make something bigger. That's always something they've been thinking about, but they haven't really pieced it together with crypto. Is my impression.
My company Gumi is actually going to be running a node on behalf of Clayton, which is the Kakao Messenger coin that's essentially like a Korean Libra, right? And then of course, we're also partnering with Line, which is the dominant messenger in Japan, which is also working on a cryptocurrency payment token as well. And so if you look in lots of different national geographies, what you'll find a dominant messenger, like a telegram, and you'll find that the dominant messenger is going to go blockchain and payment, with the weird exception of China, where you already have dominant messengers with payments that are non-blockchain. But but obviously all the other geographies are following a similar economic playbook, but using a blockchain, including Facebook, WhatsApp, but obviously also including Kakao, Line, Telegram, and others, Signal, and many others. But I think if you look in Asia, Kakao and Line are definitely for North Asia, that's where they're running the roost, and they're doing their own versions of Libra.
I guess the thing I would add, so Asia is a very interesting market, but maybe even to zoom out a little bit, for those of us who live in sort of the bubble of America, it's hard to sort of conceptualize two things that Libra and all of this other financial infrastructure, the blockchains, Bitcoin, that are trying to solve. One is there is no universal payment infrastructure globally. Like, it does not exist. Companies like us and other companies, we have to solve it even outside of this crypto world, just in general with dollars and euros and pesos. They use entirely different systems in Europe, in the US, in Mexico, in Asia. And so that problem at some level has to be solved, right? And then the second one that I think is maybe even more harder for us to conceptualize is when we talk about the underbanked and other areas where Facebook's been very specific about, we have a stable infrastructure in the US. It's old, but it's stable. On the other hand, when you look at emerging markets, the financial infrastructure is very bad. So when we talk about the regulatory climates that go up and down between different locations, we have to keep in mind that there are serious problems that have to be solved for an emerging population that is mobile and internet ready but does not have financial infrastructure. I'll give you one key example for friends of mine that aren't blockchain believers. I've lived through, like probably most of the folks on this panel, many different ups and downs of blockchain and Bitcoin and the currency side of the house. And when these nuclear winters happen, whether it's in 2013 or happened a year ago, there's this kind of notion that like this stuff is broken, it's going away, it's a fad. I think one of the single biggest things I generally point people to during the sort of bearish sentiments tends to be Google this very simple thing. Look at the local payment volume of Bitcoin in Venezuela. And what you will find when you look at that is the largest startup exponential graph you've ever seen. If you look at the volume that happens week over week growth, and this has happened for 7 years now, the infrastructure in that country is so bad that you will see it's nearly doubling every week, right? And it's been doing that for 7 years. So you take a country like that and you go, that is a problem. Now, whether that's a Bitcoin solution, whether that's a Facebook solution, or some of the next gen solutions, somebody has to solve that. And that's not the only country that that's problematic for. And so there's a whole context of this financial infrastructure that has to be thought about for the other billion in the world.
And I want to kind of also point out the thing that's really interesting, which is that, you know, when Lehman collapsed, we had this kind of concept of financial peak centralization and the kind of inefficiencies of mass centralization of financial infrastructure. But the thing that's really interesting is when you actually look at the kind of notion of what's happening in politics, right? So if you not to touch that third rail, but but the thing that's really interesting when you look at it is that what happens in democratic countries is oftentimes that politicians will implement favorable policies to buy votes, right? And so essentially what happens is that there's a profligacy in terms of the spending that comes through the government, which is really backed by money printing, right? So so when you do see a country that loses, what we're really seeing is that oftentimes a weaker country will actually try to form a peg, right? So they'll basically be like, well, our currency is going to be pegged against USD, and then they lose the peg, right? And so whenever you look at like a cryptographically stabilized coin, right, it's really a so-called stable coin, which is what Libra aspires to be, is essentially a peg, right? It's pegged against something, right? And often pegged against USD or renminbi or some other very kind of well-known currency, right? But losing the peg is really the problem, right? So to me, what you're describing is actually, but why are they losing the peg? I mean, obviously, fractional reserve is probably part of the problem, but the real problem, I think, is political, right? It's political, which is that, they spent all the money. It's like, well, why did you do that? It's because in order to stay in office, right? Like, that's why I spent all the money, right? So, there are certain problems that aren't being solved all that well. And in a way, that's why, I was speaking to a room full of bankers, and I basically said, it's really not so much that people trust Bitcoin so much, it's that they've stopped trusting you all, right? And one of the bankers said, it's like a relationship where your partner suddenly disappears, goes to cheap hotels, hangs out with shady people, and it's only then when you realize how angry they were at you the whole time. And I thought that was a very specific. I was like, oh, sounds like a personal situation, but but it was a really interesting kind of lens, right? Because this banker was basically saying, oh, I understand. Like it's not that they love Bitcoin; it's actually that they really kind of hate us and what we've done. So I guess that's a way of looking at it as well.
I love this panel. And thank you for opening this topic. The Jeremy Powell, the Fed chairman, is worried about the money laundering that the Libra could. Is it? And David Marcus, I think he said no, it's okay. We have control. I don't know. What do you think?
To me, I'm happy to hand over, but I feel like I'm ranting a bit. But what David Marcus was very clear on is he said there's no magic day when 2.3 million monthly actives of Messenger suddenly get Libra wallets, right? He's like, that's not a thing, right? He's very clear on each Libra user will be a novelly generated user with a government ID. So they're going to rebuild the entire user base based on KYC. Now, the idea would be that they would have ads inside of Messenger that would be come over and start using Libra. But still, to me, one of the things that's a fascinating defense of Libra is this notion that they will be compliant, right? In the sense of you're probably, you're an expert on financial fraud and cryptographic assets. it seems like it would be easier to catch the bad guys in a Libra than anywhere else. I don't know if you have a...
Yeah, I think the interesting question to ask with sort of the AML and fraud situation is like, not whether or not it will occur, because as long as they're humans, there will be fraud and there will be people that don't want to follow the rules. The question is, are we better than what we are today, right? Which is like cash has, billions and billions of dollars of fraud, of which 0.05% is probably tracked and persecuted. So the question is, can we do better than what we're doing today? And there's reason to believe that we can, right? When you have a digital ledger that's properly compliant, there's a reason to believe you can. And so it's a promising development there.
I think the ironic thing about that whole argument is twofold. One, the vast majority of fraud that happens in the world is cash-based fraud, right? So the notion that we're making things worse by moving away from cash-based fraud makes absolutely no sense. In fact, if you look at how they track down things like Silk Road and stuff, they actually track down the Bitcoin transactions. So the whole notion, like, I don't even know if they take it seriously. I think it's just at some level this talking point. And I think the other notion that's fascinating with it is it's ironic that we're both scared about Facebook's centralization, but the centralization is the forcing function for KYC. So KYC for the sort of non-payment insider baseball folks is this notion that any company that does payments, we are regulated. Like our company and other companies are all regulated, where we have to actually verify the identity and the information for the people who are moving money from point A to point B. It is a regulated process by something called financial FinTech, as well as other folks. And so the fact that it is pseudo-centralized, and you can argue about that and how good and bad it is, it will force it to be KYC. Therefore, it will have a higher level of identity, control, fraud verification than cash will, and many of the existing systems right now already in place. And so you kind of can't have it both ways. It either is centralized and has KYC, or it's decentralized. But
well, wait a minute, because the Libra wallet will require KYC, but anyone can build a Libra wallet. So you could send, from my KYC wallet to someone else's that hasn't been KYC, and they can hold Libra.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
There's still a mission control though. The mission control is like the black box. In order to process a transaction on the network, you still have to go through that admission control, which Facebook will control, or the set of validators will control. So even if you build your own Libra wallet, you still have to go through that box.
Yeah, and I think that's the audience for those who can't hear that on the video, what the audience is talking about is this notion of, well, Calibra wallet could sort of be spun up independently. However, this goes back to this decentralization question. There's something called the validators, which is actually what validates the payment transactions on the ledger. The validators are, at least in the current incarnation, the validators are first Facebook, and then secondly, the members of the consortium, right? So that's how the blockchain nodes get validated, that's how the payments get validated. You can bet that the government is going to hold those validators, which by the way are Facebook first, then the Visas of the world and the other enterprises. Those folks are going to be held accountable. Like that's how the payment infrastructure works. And so I think this notion that it'll be all entirely anonymous, like that is not going to exist in this world.
If you want to see one of the most complex case studies around this topic of essentially dark money, like you should study India, right? Which is Modi's demonetization policy. Absolutely bananas. I'm not going to go too deep, but essentially like completely devalued certain currency notes. And the thing that's really interesting is the speculation around the political reasons for doing this. And there's all kinds of complexity. But when you actually look at that government too, there's also talk about a Bitcoin ban, right? So it's really, really interesting and complex set of like political incentives and like the implementation of policies, right? So essentially, the government's something akin to $20 bills are worthless. Good luck, guys. So really interesting run on the banks, really, really complex. Probably, and a country extremely large population. So really, really complicated politics, but interesting as well from the perspective of like black market and control over supposed AML and supposed KYC concerns. You have a comment.
Yeah, coming from India, I might have a little bit more context there. The interesting learning from that, aside from the political sort of speculation, is that the theory behind demonetization was actually to sort of get rid of black money, and the idea was that the majority of black money was held in sort of certain notes, just like the $100 bill. It was held in like a few $1,000s and 20, denominations. My question was, like, what if we get rid of all that money? And if you have that money and you have legitimate money, you would go to a bank and you would trade it in for either high denomination or smaller denomination notes. And the idea was that all these people that had black money would not be able to justify their source of income. And therefore, when they went to the bank and tried to sort of convert their sort of illegal $100 bill into a legal $20 bill, they would be unable to do so. What ended up happening was pretty much, if you looked at what all the cash that came out at the end of the day, most of the cash ended up just coming back into the system. Like 99.99% of the cash that they sort of took out came back into the system within a few months. And so the point, the lesson there is that cash is actually really, really bad. Our current system is really, really bad at KYC and ML, and so we do a lot better. And whether it's Calibra, whether it's something new, we'll have to do better going forward.
So because I'm not sure my mic is working. So, no, it works.
It is.
Thank you. No, because the button is red, so I think it was green instead. So we're in Silicon Valley, so I must ask, and it's about the community of developers. We are lucky to have a YC guy with us, the VC community. What is the community saying around the Libra? Is that an interest on those community? Conversation, or no one cares, and it just went. Shouhei, the VC, what do they say?
So, people talk about adoption and validation of the technology, and those two respects. I think the people I talk to in the blockchain community, FinTech community, I think Libra is a positive in that respect. Mm-hmm. Again, I think I just talked about this, but so when people hear about blockchain, they think about Bitcoin and then all these altcoins that were used for speculation. And this new Libra thing changes that in the sense that, people, actually look at it as like a technology, right? And that, that's being interesting for VCs because, that makes it so, a lot more talent comes into the space. Because, good engineers want to work on something that have interesting technical problems. And if people, if it's viewed as very, speculative and very, immature, it's very hard for engineers to come in. In that respect, it's a positive, and that's, community seeing it, VC community seeing that as a good thing. Yeah, in terms of, I actually want to talk about how, there's concern about it, given a lot of people are trying to build out the financial infrastructure. So a lot of startups so a lot of the financial infrastructure out there is very outdated. A lot of payment technology has been not really changed. How should securities transactions settle in private markets, public markets? I mean, it is evolving, but there's still a lot of problems there. And when something like Libra comes out and is able to essentially wipe out everybody and that covers everything, that can be kind of a concern. So like that, in that respect, some people are viewing it as kind of negative, given it can crowd out a lot of the infrastructure plays that are happening in the VC FinTech kind of community.
What about the kids in the blockchain? So, right, fashion jokes sometimes.
Look, I think there anything that's sort of moving things along is have people on both sides. I think there are people who feel like this elevated conversation made it more relevant, bringing more people into the space, actually could accelerate sort of this adoption curve that we really want to see, which is the new open financial system. On the other hand, you sort of have the philosophically pure, so to speak, people who originally got into this space for the right quote unquote reasons, who might be a little bit more disappointed. So I think on the whole, people are excited. It's elevated the conversation. And you definitely have the people who are sort of disenchanted because they had a very different vision of a decentralized, self-sovereign, independent, money.
Yeah, it's going to be inspiring, I guess. I saw a comment from Alfred Kelly Jr. that you all know, who is the CEO and board chairman of Visa, saying that because there's 28 partners, right? So it's a mix of different things which are hard to understand. So he was saying, no, we're not partner. We're just interested and curious to hear what is this partnership, this beautiful graph with even some French billionaire around. Are they really partner? What does that mean?
I mean, it's what in the industry is called like a Barney announcement, right? Which is, I love you, you love me, like all the purple dinosaurs getting together. Because none of the consortium participants have actually written a check, so there's no money that's actually traded hands. So, to me, it is very much like that. And in a sense, it's a very clever marketing routine, right? Because if Visa's there, MasterCard has to come, and if Uber's there, Lyft has to come. So they've really consolidated a lot of addressable market segments that way. But clearly they have a lot of attention, and I think it's positive.
Yeah. So we've been fortunate enough to spend some time with quite a few of the consortium members, and I think the thing that's I would say good overall in the long-term trajectory of blockchain evolution is many of the members of the consortium outside of Facebook have had blockchain projects in the labs for quite some time. And if you look at it, quite a few of them have had material patents come out. But if you also look at those organizations, nearly all of them have not moved any blockchain projects out of the labs. So they've done great PR for the last 3 years about patents, but they actually haven't shipped any commercial blockchain projects. In fact, very few, and this is part of the sort of disenfranchised or disillusionment I think some folks have about the blockchain space is there's a lot of lab and infrastructure work. Very little of it has gotten out into consumer enterprise level volume. And so I think what's interesting about what Facebook's sort of Barney release does is Facebook is more likely to actually release the damn thing, right? And so that becomes a forcing function for all these other consortium companies who have a team of blockchain developers sitting in a lab who can't get their product manager to actually push it to a GM to get anything ever actually out there. And so when we want to see as a blockchain industry, companies actually adopt blockchain, you need these forcing functions to move them into a commercialized space. And so I think these are the kinds of things that help those companies in the consortium go, we should actually make something real for customers now. And I, for one, think that stage has to happen. When we go back to the VC space, I think that there's been so many companies who built really interesting things, but have not actually made them commercially viable, right? And that's one of the things I think there is a handful of companies that are focused on. The internet was an interesting concept for all the pets.com until Amazon came around and said, we're going to actually make better e-commerce software so you can buy stuff cheaper, faster, and more efficient. So you have to have blockchain stuff that actually provides value to customers. And so these are the kinds of forcing functions that move the conversation in that direction.
Speaking about crypto, what are the consequences of, I saw that the crypto was kind of rising up a little bit, but what can you make a comment about the impact of the Libra announcement with the cryptocurrency market and value and so on?
I think Shouhei hit the nail on the head for me, which is mass adoption, right? So I think there couldn't be a more kind of a Netscape-y moment or an AOL moment for this, other than 2.3 billion monthly actives at least becoming aware, right? They'll probably see banner ads for make a Libra wallet, So to me, I think it's definitely that's the effect. And when you do look at the kind of Thomas Schelling game theoretical dynamics around something like a Bitcoin, right? It's fascinating, right? Because everyone's got a poker hand, they're not communicating with each other, but they're all trying to guess what the others are going to do, right? And so the thing that's really interesting when Facebook throws their hand on the table is all of a sudden, like, everyone sees what the play is, right? So that, I think it's related to what you were describing about, like, now we have to ship blockchain projects. It's very similar. All the people looking at their own hands are like, oh, okay, I see what I have to do. I either fold but I have to respond. And that's the point. The point is everyone has to respond. That's the really interesting thing that's happening.
I know Facebook. Facebook is a hacking company, and also it's a company that makes a lot of money, but really a lot of money. So, and it's I was like you watching David interview that on NBC, and the lady was asking about, okay, are you going to launch some financial services, you know, loans and stuff, and David was saying, no, it's going to be years, I don't know, decades maybe before we. Where is the money around that? Where do they will make money somehow with this project? Where's the money? Where's the money?
Well, there's great gains to be had with the most primitive applications of all, right? Which is like, if you just look at the remittance, you know, like if you look at just an average country like Honduras, it's like 20% of their money supply is in the form of remittance, right? So it's really huge international money flows, which effectively form like a killer application. Now, when you look at the margins that exist in that business, they're very high margins, right? So if all they do is just take very small margins, it's going to be potentially dwarfing the ad revenue of Facebook. So, you know, if you think about that, you may actually be able to believe Mark Zuckerberg when he says something like, I'm going to make a Facebook that does respect your privacy, right? And if you reason about that statement, the only way he could do so is by dwarfing his ad revenue by some other revenue stream, you know. So it's either that or he's just basically lying blatantly to everyone, you know. So you know, I choose to believe that he's got bigger plans. And I think that's really, the simplest thing is really just taking small transactional fees from remittance. And that's a really, really killer application for blockchain technology.
I mean, that's just one example. I mean, you can look at what happened in the App Store. I think 30% of every cut. Imagine that you now have a native currency that you can now have, you know, a new farm will where you can buy, you know, a little plot of land. You take 10% of every virtual acre that people buy. People love that, right? And you know, look at what Fortnite has done with skins. Imagine that on Facebook. They love gaming. They're already doing that with Oculus, right? So the question is not whether or not this will make money; it's really how much will it make. And knowing Mark will make a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost a funny question, right? Like everybody inherently knows banks make a lot of money, and then you go, well, it turns out, and this was recently in the news, I think 2 weeks ago, Visa has now surpassed the market cap of any bank that ever actually started Visa. So Visa was started by a number of consortium banks, so it's actually somewhat similar in this context. So now Visa is bigger than all of the banks, and now we're talking about Visa as a network that connects the banks. Now we're talking about a network that connects all that stuff. That's probably going to make even more money than that, right? This notion of like, you know, them talking about years out. Here's the thing about that's kind of part of their strategy, right? Like Facebook's this really funny thing, and tech companies like this are in general, where for the whole lead up until their IPO, people are like, this is dumb, it's just a bunch of, you know, pet streams, why is anybody gonna ever use it? It's gonna go away and die, it'll never make money, it's like, you know, this IPO is totally like they're losing all of this money. And then we went from all of that stage to like, they're dominating the world, they're making too much money, and they're destroying our political system, right? Like, by just turning on ads overnight, like, you know, so if you think about that adoption curve, they were not worried about making money the first couple of years. They knew that scale was the game. And so if you look at how big financial services get, and they play that same game out again, they'll be fine, right? So.
Yeah, I totally agree, which is like a medium-sized bank in a small-sized country is a unicorn, right? So there's thousands of unicorns. But I think the thing that's fascinating about that kind of adoption curve, well, when I said everybody has to respond, that's the trick, right? So if you read David Marcus's Twitter feed today, he basically is retweeting an article about the China coin. So China is going to release a essentially fully centralized digital currency based on a blockchain, right? And his argument was, look, in order for the West and Western democracies to compete, we have to leverage innovation that's intrinsic to our system, right? And obviously it's an extremely blatant shill for his Libra market, right? But that's the point, right? And what I mean by that's the point is that, like, you know, everyone, he's essentially like forcing people to respond, right? Like that's basically what's happening. And the US government will have to respond, and China's responding. And in fact, the article that was about the China coin actually had quotes from the Chinese People's Bank that essentially said, we're inspired by Libra. So the bank, the People's Bank of China, PBOC, is actually responding to Libra, which is amazing, right? That's an amazing historic event. And the thing that's really interesting about the cascade of events is you can bet that members of the United States Congress will respond to the People's Bank of China, right? So it's darn interesting.
Yeah, we were mentioning a fast food company, but also Walmart recently came in the game and explained that I know they work with the blockchain because they started with the Mango to get, give the full control of the where the mangoes were coming. They were trying to create a consortium. It's frightening. With other retailers, that's the only stories I've seen. That's exactly what you were saying. It will encourage probably maybe cooperation too. Is it really possible?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at for example, in Japan, Rakuten, which is sort of Amazon-like, is they just entered the crypto exchange business, just last week. So it definitely there's a lot of people that are responding, and I think that's the real effect. So for sure, and Walmart will probably do more than mangoes at some point, and Amazon we're all waiting for Amazon, and I think it was Ben Horowitz who tweeted the other day. He's like, well, if you think Libra is interesting, other large tech companies also have projects, I think was his tweet. And it's kind of like, okay, that's really interesting, right? It's like, first of all, Ben Horowitz would know. And second of all, which large tech companies is he imagining, right? And so it's like, how can we imagine that Facebook will be the only $800+ billion company that will do anything like this? It's not so. Right? Apple will find a thing to do, Google will find a thing to do, and honestly, Apple and Google are extremely important because of the mobile devices, right? So I suspect one of Apple or Google will end up joining Libra, and the other one will end up creating a rebel alliance against, right? And it'll be mobile device channel based. So long story short is it'll be interesting.
I have a last question. Oh, Jimmy, you want to say something?
Well, I think to your question, the thing to also keep in mind is the catalyst is more than just payments, right? So we're talking about the financial infrastructure, but when you talk about Walmart and Amazon, there are so many other applications of blockchain. Like we spend a ton of time on the enterprise side with these other supply chain tracking, smart contracts, all these other applications of it. So when you have this level of interest, financial opportunity, developer relations, all of these things just drive it forward. It's when you talk about the Netscape moment, the internet became so much bigger than we ever imagined. And so I think when you talk about other enterprises getting involved, we can't limit it to just simply enterprises getting involved in payment infrastructure. Blockchain does a lot more than that, and this is a catalyst for more than just payment infrastructure.
But payment is the killer application.
It makes a lot of money.
And you wouldn't deny that, right?
It does make a lot of money.
CEO of a payments company.
Yeah.
So last question before to ask to any of the panelists news about their business or whatever they want to announce. Speaking about the people on the street, there was a poll recently that said that people are really not ready for something like Libra. The journalists, obviously, they always bring the story about the issue with the privacy and stuff. So my question is that, is Libra Armageddon or what? Is it really happening? And will it create really like a, Armageddon, the movie? It's like, yeah, sorry, it's Armageddon. So what do you think? Last comment.
Libra is maybe only one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So, but it's not all of them. What I mean to say is that, in a sense, it's more of like a symptom rather than the fact of itself, right? Which is that, in a sense, like when we look back at this moment historically, we're going to all be able to say, of course, that's what happened, right? So to me, like, it's an inevitability rather than something, particularly novel unto itself.
You would agree, Shouhei?
I don't think it's an Armageddon moment. I think the way Facebook thinks about this is Facebook is a network effect business, right? So they creep up little by little. So it's more like a virus, right? It's not like an asteroid.
It's like a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, it's more like a zombie
asteroid,
right? It goes into your body. It doesn't really affect you at all, right? Then all of a sudden, when it gets critical mass, then you start seeing, epidemics, slower spread, use of the product. So I think that's Facebook's game plan. I mean, that's how Facebook grew, right? I mean, they went to network by network. They went to Harvard. They went to, I think maybe that's how they're thinking about it. So it's like they're trying to creep up and try to, put this in little by little.
And apparently, like 1 billion Facebook accounts are bots and like zombie accounts. maybe you're right.
Okay, back on Earth, back to the ground. Everyone, do you have any news? Something hot happening? I'd like to finish the panel with a little bit of your own story and what's going on. Well, you're the first, and then
Yeah.
I don't know, you raise money or I don't know, something.
No. Well, we just sort of launched a Y Combinator, this past week, and we're basically sort of helping solve the fraud problem in crypto. So if you guys are companies that are sort of trying to figure that out, feel free to reach out to me, whether it's compliance or AML, happy to help.
Veeco.
That's great. Evercoin announced a friends and family fundraising round with Roger Ver, controversial and brilliant entrepreneur, as well as some other friends and family. And pursuant to this topic, Evercoin CEO has already promised to implement Libra in Evercoin. So I think that will be, again, interesting times. And we're responding, as most people are.
Exciting. Jeremy.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, so what's exciting to me about this time is, so PayStand's been around for a few years. And what's fun to me about the stage of the evolution of blockchain is you're now getting a class of companies that are sort of at a commercial scale. So I think one of the things you hear is there's early stage startups and then there's Facebook, right? And these big giant companies that have all of this leverage. But there's another class which is when you have any major technology revolution, you have a new class of businesses that are building entirely new things. And so I think what you have is a market that's mature now where there are dozens of companies that have built real businesses with real customers, with real revenue that are providing real value. And so I think whether it's our company in the unsexy enterprise space or identity companies or supply chain tracking companies, you're now far enough in the field where there's actually not just these crazy early stage ICO things, right? And then the Facebooks of the world. There's actually another thing, which is a totally native blockchain company with real customers, creating real value and real profit. And so I think that's really fun for companies like us to actually start creating the new class.
Shouhei, any news?
not particularly. I work in venture capital, so if there's just any interesting companies out there that are here. I was in Japan for a while, so if there's anything Japan related that you want to talk about, anybody you want to talk to in Japan, let me know. What else? I just had my 1 year anniversary. That's pretty much it. Nothing job related that's worth announcing right now.
It's we're done. We had updates from every panelist, so it's now.
Thank you very much, everyone. Everyone give them a big round of applause.